Good luck. All right, we'll start with the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right, consent agenda. The consent agenda is made up of routine day-to-day items that require board action but do not appear to have a significant public impact. Items may be pulled from the consent agenda for separate discussion or vote by any board member. This month, we have item A, approval of board meeting minutes from November 2023. Item B, payroll checks totaling $125,350.71 for November and $121,862.79 for December 2023. Item C, maintenance and operations checks number 27901 to 27987, totaling $1,398,121.41 for November 2023, and checks 27988 to 28038, totaling $1,816,632.97 for December 2023. Item D, approved passenger facility charge totaling $64,802.27 for November 2023 and $60,026.40 for December 2023. Lastly, item E, financial report for November 2023 and December 2023. Does any board member have an item that they would like to pull for further discussion or comment?
We accept the consent agenda.
I have a movement for the consent agenda. Any further discussion? Can I get a second?
I'll second.
Got a motion and a second. All in favor of approving the consent agenda, say aye. Aye. And nay. The ayes have it. All right, director's report.
Yeah, thanks everyone and welcome back. Good to see everybody here in January. I'll be brief. A couple of things that are noteworthy. We did conclude the year, the calendar year, with 181,243 boardings. That's our 5th busiest year ever and a 26% increase over the prior calendar year. So we have regained our pre-COVID footing, and I do expect the current calendar year will see some increases. If for no other reason than we didn't have Minneapolis last January and part of February. So at least the next 45 days, we should have increased boardings just due to the fact we have more lift. Come summer, we are seeing the expansion of Alaska back to 2 flights daily. That will happen in mid-May, and right now they're telling us it'll run through mid-October. Last time I looked, and it's been a couple weeks, you could only book that into August because they haven't loaded their fall schedule yet. But they should be loading fall in the next few weeks, so that'll probably continue all the way, it sounds like, just about to the beginning of November in that time frame. We were told last week that Chicago is returning. We don't know what that schedule will look like. They had previously told us it would likely drop from an Airbus 319 down to an RJ. My hope is it's an RJ Saturday and Sunday. You may recall last year we only had an Airbus once a week, and I think it was a Saturday. And so if we can get that to Saturday and Sunday on an RJ, that would be a better schedule. A little more likely people would be able to use that for a return flight, that kind of thing. So we anticipate our seats will be even maybe a little bit higher than last summer when we see the final schedule loads for 2024, which have not happened yet. Delta hasn't loaded their summer schedule in any of the Montana airports. United has loaded theirs. We will see a seat reduction on Denver. They're going to pull out the A320s. We just didn't fill them last year, so we'll be on a 319 twice daily schedule, which is kind of what they did. They got into June and pulled the 320s last year because we weren't filling them. And so it'll be similar kind of July on to what we had last year. So a little bit of seat reduction in Denver, a pretty good increase, doubling of seats to Seattle. And then we anticipate Chicago to be somewhat similar if they go with 2 days rather than 1 day on an Airbus. So summer's shaping up to be pretty decent from that regard. U.S. Customs is making some changes. I think I emailed a couple of you, or may have heard of it, in working with Dwight over the last couple of weeks. In the Seattle region, which extends from the Dakotas back to Seattle, they want to go to a new rate structure, I guess I would call it, where if your flight comes in after hours, so after the 4 p.m. closure time, 8 to 4 is their current schedule, they want to charge for the overtime that it takes to process that flight, which is a new deal. So it used to be if you were an international airport like us, that typically means that you get free clearance at the airport. They don't have to take your flight. So if you call in and say, I want to come in at 2 in the morning and they don't have staff or staff that's willing to work, normally they would just say, no, you can't come through. But in Great Falls, for the most part, they have been taking those flights. We're told that costs about $60,000 a year in overtime for the customs folks. In comparison, we pay about $50,000 to provide them with a free building every year, which you're required to do to be in the program. So we have a $50,000 outlay. If you look at the charges we get from those flights, I would estimate we lose about $30,000 a year on that cost center. The two things that it does do that I think are important are it generates business for our GA, for FBOs, both FBOs, and so there's business they're getting on that fueling, that catering, whatever services are provided, lab, that type of thing. So they're going to get some revenue off of that. And then the other thing that it does for us is there's a once a week Calgary flight that comes in on Saturday morning early, and that flight helps FedEx kind of do what they do here. And so that volume gets put into the Memphis flights that leave out on Monday. So it's good to have that service. Previously, Customs had always told us no matter what, because that's a scheduled FedEx flight, they would cover that flight. But now they're saying they're going to charge FedEx too. They estimate the cost is going to be $500 to $600 per flight. By way of comparison, the average GA aircraft that comes through, if they take on a full tank of gas, they would pay GTF about $60 in fuel flowage fees. They don't pay a landing fee. A large GA, like 737 size GA, that would come through and process would pay the airport about $200. And so Customs is going to tack $500 to $600 on top of that. So it will be a substantial change in what is offered. They're telling us they're going to do this across the Seattle region, and we've asked them, can we implement that all at once? Because obviously, Home and Aviation is competing with Fargo or Grand Forks, I assume, other airports in the northern strata to pick up those flights that are coming overnight. And we generate about 900 flights per year through that. We're on the pace for 900 flights this year on that customs facility, a little bit higher than normal. Normally it's 800. It's 900 flights that do come through here every year. Everything from Google execs to last week there was a notable superstar actress came through. It's any kind of commerce you can imagine comes through that 900 times per year. That is more flights than anywhere between here and Seattle. So we have the largest customs clearance port currently between here and Seattle. Another reason we want to keep that customs presence here, even though we lose money on that, is if we would ever get a foreign trade zone in the region, all the staffing you can have around the customs apparatus, if you're close to a border, if you're close to a customs clearance point, those staff are the people that are going to clear cargo in that foreign trade zone. So it's beneficial for us to have the 2 to 3 agents here at the airport who might be able to slip away for an hour and go to a bonded warehouse and check out that cargo during the day. Foreign trade zones, there aren't a ton of them. There's not a tremendous amount of activity around many of them. There are in border states. Although we are a border state, there's not a tremendous amount of cargo that's coming over like the southern border. We have the Maquiadora effect. So it's beneficial. My bottom line is we should hang on to it as long as we can. And so we're working with Senator Tester's office, and we plan to broaden that out to the rest of the delegation. We have some very simple asks. The first is if it's going to be done in the Seattle region, it should be done at all the Seattle region at once, because somebody that's planning to fly through Great Falls might easily change their reservation to Fargo, and they would be out that business. And that's not really fair when you have a charge that's that substantial to suddenly handicap a community and they don't get any of that commerce. Number two, if we're doing it at all across the northern border, why aren't we doing it across the northern border? So if this is necessary for budget constraints, which is what they've said, then why aren't we doing it in Detroit region, Chicago region, across the northern border, such that there's a level playing field for everybody? I think that's a reasonable request. And so those are the couple of things. We've notified some other airports and said, hey, are you worried about this? I have a call with one airport tomorrow. Is this something you want to push back on? I think it's interesting in talking to Customs about why they have this problem. Number one, they have to send agents to the southern border, and they have to pay for that. And in our conversations, they said that can cost $10,000 in lodging and food to send an agent down there. So they're having to absorb that cost in our region, which doesn't quite seem right. Number two, they've got increased activity on the northern border on the outbound side. I had to ask many questions. Okay, let me get this straight. So you have more activity in Coots now that you're in charge of overseeing, going into Canada. What is the essence of that activity? Well, there's illegal stuff happening that goes through the border, and so they're trying to catch them coming into Canada now. Our people are. And I asked, well, isn't that a Canadian expense or a Canadian problem? Of course, that was laughed at, but I just, it's interesting to me that we're not talking about a lot of money, $60,000, and these are the kinds of expenses that are being funded at these other things. And as I said, on the southern border, there's great effort made to try and get that plane as soon as it comes across the border and see who's on it, what's on it. Whereas on the northern border, it seems as though we're just as happy to tell that plane, we'll go to Salt Lake or LA and fly more hours into the inland where you can get free processing. And so it doesn't make a ton of sense to me. On the other hand, I think we, generally we're accepting in our culture more of a pay-to-play type of, structure around our federal, resources. And so, if everyone's willing to accept that they're going to pay $500 or $600 more per flight, and that's the game to get into the country, maybe that's okay. It's a level playing field, and we'll get by it. Nonetheless, this will reduce activity, at the airports that have to implement this cost, because it is a substantial one. And so I do think we're going to see the erosion of this line of business, which is already in the red for us. And so no action we're asking for at this point for the board, just a notice of where what's going on, and we'll continue to work on that and try to drum up some support. Many airports have not been informed of this yet, we were told. I know some of the other Montana airports, I think, had meetings this week. And then I believe the Dakota airports are on tap to hear this sometime soon also. So hopefully there'll be enough of a network there that we can at least get a rational outcome, like, let's do it across the whole northern border, or at least let's do our huge region at once. And it seems as though there might be some latitude to work with the Seattle district to do that.
Seems like they're making a profit too. They're paying for overtime.
Well, what we've been told is a couple principles. It's federal employees, so these rules don't comport to an organization like us. But if you come in at all, you have to be paid for, I believe it's 8 hours. Isn't that what they said? Or was it 8 or 3?
I don't know how many hours.
Yeah, there's a minimum component to it. If you come in at all, you get like a full day's. And on top of that, if you come in at all, it's always at double time. So it's a relatively little amount of hours, and they've got agent safety issues. So it can't just be one guy coming in. It sounds like often it's 2 people coming in. So by the time you get done with all that multiplication, you end up at around $500 or $600 per flight.
Who else is international in Montana?
Kalispell falls under the same rules as us, don't they? Or do you know that? I think they're also international. Bozeman is a user rights airport, so you have to pay for everything anyway, for that service. And so hopefully those fees will shake out such that we're all paying the same for the salaries piece of it. But in Bozeman, you already have to pay for that. And I believe Missoula has that also. I think you can also land there. It's a landing rights airport, but you have to pay for the customs service on your airplane.
Director Faulkner. Question, you said the zone runs from Seattle to the Dakotas. How far south does that zone
go? Is it just states that share a northern border?
Yes,
Or
I misspoke, only North Dakota. South Dakota is actually in a different region. It must shift over to Chicago, would be my guess. So it's just North Dakota.
what are the chances that if they do roll it out across the Seattle to the Dakota zone that we fall under, what are the chances that the flights that currently come into Great Falls just move one state to the south and land? I don't know if Idaho Falls is international or whatever, I doubt it, but what are the chances they just move one state to the south?
Right, and that's part of the problem, I think, is I think Idaho falls in our district, but Utah may not. I mean, they are going to overfly to get to some place that doesn't have the speed. And that's kind of why I think, if we're doing this, it ought to be done unilaterally, for flights coming in the northern tier. It seems unfair to saddle some communities with this cost and not others. That's not typically how we manage our federal government, and so it'd be great to have that done unilaterally if we're doing it. I mean, my other question is, this seems like a relatively small expense for the value of understanding who's in those planes as soon as you can, rather than letting these planes come all the way into our interior with who knows what or who on them. They do file a manifest ahead of time, but nonetheless, it doesn't mean it's true.
A lot of these aircraft aren't going to have the range to go beyond
Much further.
Great Falls.
Right. The lion's share, so our customs port estimates about 20% of the flights are overnight flights. And predominantly, those are going to be longer range airplanes because they're starting, and this is the other thing we've pointed out to them when we've asked them is, we would like to see the bell curve of arrivals because I doubt you're getting anyone at 8 o'clock. So why are you starting your day at 8 o'clock? Maybe we want to start our day at 10 o'clock and go until 6 p.m. So that's the other ask we've made of them is if we're going to make this concession, we want similar concessions from you guys, like, hey, let's shift the day, so that it comports with when people come. And so the majority of the planes, that are coming overnight are probably starting in Europe or Asia somewhere. And so they're dropping in overnight because it's about that flight time. And those tend to be, I guess I would say the higher value ones, Jeremy. I mean, the other reason they're stopping here is a 767 coming out of Spain runs out of gas about here. And the Canadian fuel flowage charges are so much higher than they are in the U.S. So everyone tries to squeak across the border in order to get that cheaper fuel. It is what I would say that, it was higher value, not as a people, but in terms of revenue that stays in our community, it's definitely those higher value flights that we're seeing dropping in overnight.
Customs here historically, Jeremy, you can chime in, but historically, they're not user-friendly here. They're rather grumpy and like to complain about having to come in and do a little extra work.
I would say our customs here is not unlike other customs folks that I've dealt with throughout my career.
I don't know, I mean,
In their defense,
there was a flight.
somewhat.
There was a flight that came in from Europe. They flew nonstop from Europe into Great Falls. They had pre-arranged everything.
I know where you're going.
The customs guys sent them back to Canada. They were going to send them back to Keflavik, Iceland, to spend the night. They ended up flying to Calgary to spend the night to go to Spokane for the customs the next day. They're historically difficult here.
And that's not unlike what I've experienced. I mean, that is one agency that has a tremendous amount of latitude. I'll say that.
Too much.
And we think our planning department is tough.
I mean, we live in an era where government is able to, extend a pretty long shadow.
So at the moment, no action to be taken, we just need to keep an eye on it.
Yeah, I
See
mean,
what
we're
the decision is.
gonna feel out the environment and then see if we can't move this towards a unilateral rollout of this. I mean, that just seems fair. And I don't know how much interest the delegation will have in assisting with that. I think a lot will depend. I mean, we are by far the biggest of the benefactors in the state of having this customs facility. I don't know how much other facilities are going to want to push back. If maybe Fargo is another big user of customs services, maybe they would be interested. We might be able to pair up and see if we can come up with some better outcomes.
It's just, $60,000 a year just seems as a drop in the bucket.
It is.
It's just ridiculous.
It is, and I think there'll be some airports that'll pay for that. That are have that much value out of that. If you had some major tenant that was really generating a tremendous amount of revenue, you're probably going to see some airports that pick that up. So it's going to create these disparities between airports as to what you're paying and getting, to do it this way. And then my question to them is, okay, I mean, you're kind of on a razor's edge here, telling me this is a very low risk activity, so we don't care where they fly to. And then at that point, I say, well, if we don't have the resources to clear them, then why not just let them go? I mean, it seems as though that's kind of how we're operating our borders now. I mean, why check it? Why clear it at all? If that's the case, I mean, have them submit the paperwork when they land in the drop box, like your keys at the mechanic, and you'll work on it the next day. I mean, I'm not being cavalier about that. I'm just saying if it is a low risk activity, then, I mean, to me, then let's treat it as such. Otherwise, it's an important governmental function, and we ought to be staffing it appropriately. It's hard to say there's a middle ground, where it's important but not that important.
I'll keep us informed.
Yep. The other couple things I was going to report on quickly, we did activate the access control system. It is now active. So we're generating cards and pins to get into the secure area in almost all of our doorways. We've got video overlay. We've got door alarms. So now if you prop a door open, we'll know. So far, I'm actually kind of shocked how well it's running. We had some inevitable hiccups. For some reason, if your PIN number is a social security number, if it started with a 0, it's the last 4, started with a 0, the system wouldn't recognize it. So now they've become 9s. We've put them in the system as a 9. That seems to work fine. Just simple things like that no one can ever guess what it's going to be, but it's something. We had one door that was malfunctioning initially. If you badged it twice, it would open without a PIN. That's since been fixed. Seems like it's running really well. So that gives us a really nice security footprint. And I'm sure there'll be some more cleanup issues, but so far the airlines seems to be working okay. We've got some dial-ins to work with them on. For instance, how long should the bag belt run? Because when you turn on the bag belt down there behind the counter, you pin in, badge it, the door opens. And so it runs for, what do we decide right now? Is it 8 minutes?
Maybe
Somewhere in the neighborhood of 8 minutes. It's that human factors issue of, is that too long that you forget it's running when you go to use the bathroom and leave a hole in the wall? Or is that too short that you're constantly rebadging it when you're trying to check people in? And so we've got to find that happy handoff of, okay, I recall that I just started that and I've got to man the hole in the wall, but I have other things to do, so I'm going to hand that off to a teammate and they've got to badge in, or another airline has started since I started and I need to hand that off to them and they need to badge in. Just all those factors of how long should that be open before we want it to automatically shut. It's same with the gate doors in the back. We've been kind of asking the airlines, is the door going off before you're done boarding? We've got it set to like 40 minutes. That's the one door we allow them to prop open during an operation because the passengers have to go through there. So we want to know, is 40 minutes too short, such that halfway through the flight the door alarm goes off and there's chaos in the whole room? Or is that too long, such that you've already gotten everyone off, you've gotten everyone on, and now you've forgotten that the door is still open? And everyone walked away and the alarm's going off and the only person that knows it is our policeman. So dialing in those kinds of things will be a longer term conversation to get that right. But so far, it's very impressive. The system has a lot of capabilities. As we get kind of trained up on it and used to running it, there's things we can activate. Like one of the things I really like is it has we can lock it down to a motion sensor. So overnight when we close the terminal, we could set that so that the police know if anything moves in the area where no one should be in. So if we had somebody that accidentally got left in here, which is, believe it or not, happened. We had a passenger locked in years ago. Or if we have somebody that snuck in, we would get alerted to that by the camera system identifying areas of the building that should be off limits. And so I'm excited about the potential for that system going forward. It is more or less done. We have a few more cleanups, but pretty much done. And lastly, we have a potential development opportunity. There's a cargo and I call it kind of cargo warehouse and hangar project that is working with the state. They've kind of identified Great Falls as one of the final options. We're working with them to kind of understand what their facility needs are, how many acres, that kind of thing, what their heights are. Obviously, with our crosswind runway configuration, there's some areas where, tall things can't go, kind of overlap between the two runways. And so trying to get an idea of what that is. They're considering financing some fairly large facilities. They have determined that their infrastructure needs are about 10 million just in infrastructure. So we're trying to work with them on a special facility bond kind of structure. Special facility bonds, I've done them several times in my career. Generally what that is, it's kind of like a stadium bond or occasionally you'll see like a rental car bond where the activity is bonded, and FedEx was done this way. The activity gets bonded, there's a lease behind that. The revenue of the lease is enough to pay the debt service, and then the whole project gets financed on a tax-exempt basis. Typically, that means that at the end of that financing, the buildings have to revert to the airport authority or some other public entity to keep the whole thing tax-exempt. But it's a really good tool for large projects like that, so we're trying to work with them on that. The authority in those cases doesn't accept any liability for those bonds. They're special activity bonds, so the activity itself generates the bond security. So the two main hurdles you have to clear in a special facility bond are, number one, is there enough revenue generated by the use to pay the bond back? And number two, if that tenant were to default, is there a secondary tenant that could logically be put in that facility? So in the case of FedEx, in the bond due diligence, you would say, okay, FedEx, if they go away, we would look to, back then, it would have been probably DHL or UPS to come in and take over this facility, and things would continue on. And so that's kind of the two hurdles there, but an exciting opportunity, and will be more. I think they might even come next month to kind of talk about what they want to do. So just a heads up on that, and I think that's all I've got. Everything else on the agendas.
Anything for capital projects?
Just that access control project. The other stuff, I'll wait. Most of it's on the agenda. So.
Okay. Anything for cash reserves?
The only thing I'd say there is we are holding firm at about $9 million in cash reserves, which is terrific at this point in the program. Pretty much all the unreimbursed outflows we're through them. So we kind of started around $8-9 million. We're ending the major outlay of our program at $9 million. So we kind of weathered that storm.
So is the terminal project completely done now with baggage,
There's some-
belts and everything?
No, so on the baggage, we've still got to do the outbound side of the baggage system. So right now, they go through the TSA screening machines, and then the airlines just pick them up right there at the end. We still need to put together the Bozeman belts in the back there. We'll run them out to the side. So that's got to be done, but there's not much expense in that because Bozeman gave us those belts. So we've got some electrical we've got to do and some other things too. We're also looking at we have a little bit of overhang on the budget. So we're looking at using that to enclose a couple of spaces in the back. The airlines are still kind of saying they don't have enough space. So we're trying to assess, does properties agree, would they pay for it? Because if they'll pay for it, then we can enclose a couple bays in the back to create another space or two for the airlines. So we may use the money to do that, to get those enclosed. So the majority of it's done. We've got a couple overhang things, but day to day, there's no one from Dick Anderson here anymore. We're using everything from the project. So.
All right, we'll move on. Election of officers. We'll start with the chair position first, then move on to the vice chair position after that. As far as the chair position goes, I'm ready and we're willing to maintain the chairmanship, but I'm not particularly attached to it. So if somebody else does want the position or would like to see someone else in the position, wouldn't hurt my feelings. Hopefully you all saw the agenda and maybe put some thought into it. But with that said, I would open the floor for discussion and nomination for the chair position.
I nominate Casey Woodland.
Second.
Fair enough. We've got a motion and a second for myself to retain the chairmanship. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
And nay. The ayes have it, so I will retain the chairmanship. And vice chair, Commissioner Eretz.
I'm willing to continue,
Ready and willing? Perfect.
unless somebody else wants a shot at it.
Okay. With that, I will open that for discussion and nomination.
ask a question? Are you a city appointed, and I know you're a county appointed? Not that that matters, but I just want.
I'm county, and this is my last year.
So you're both county appointed? Okay. I make the motion.
Just one amendment to that statement. The county has said they don't have a term any longer, so I mean, it wouldn't necessarily have to be your last year.
I'll make the appointment for Mr. Aretz to retain the vice president position.
Got a motion for Commissioner Eriks. Do we have a second for that? Any additional discussion?